WideOrbit is a company that is not new to anyone who is at Beat Retreat in the city. It's a company that's been the operational backbone of so many of the networks that we know and the broadcasters. So I'm curious, what is the pivot that you've been able to make as a company to start thinking about the breadth of inventory that you have by being on the back end of so many folks' operations?
Yeah, so like you touched on, WideOrbit's been around for 20 years. And I think with that, you have to constantly keep adapting. I think one natural progression is to fall into that programmatic space, right? Because we have that access to the inventory. We're a traffic system. So it's perfect sense for us to be able to execute TV buys through that. We've seen a lot of success with brands who are able to really be much more strategic, as instead of just being across the board in all markets that might not be necessary, they are having easy access to just pinpoint exactly market specific, program specific, and really be able to see that reporting in a timely fashion next day to make those decisions as quickly as possible.
So as marketers and agencies dive into that pool of inventory and start to have the opportunity to really define things with more precision, what are some of the things that are really working effectively for them and when they work with WideOrbit?
Yeah, so there's no cookie cutter approach. So what an agency needs for their specific clients may be very different than what a brand or a DR is going to need. So that's where we kind of take that consultative approach to guide them in the sense of what we think is going to make the most sense based on spend, flight periods, things of that nature. So it really is a conversation that's dependent on what those goals are for the advertiser. But we are seeing great success across the board because there's lots of different ways you can execute across our platform and nationally, both local broadcasts.
And are there any major differences if you had to pick some themes between, let's call it, established brands on the one hand and maybe the digital native D2C brands that we talked about on stage? Any major themes or kinds of solutions they gravitate to? Any differences there?
I think the one thing we're seeing is the shift from digital coming towards the TV space. I think that's exciting because they're looking at it from an impression standpoint, and it makes perfect sense for them to have an easy way to access that inventory and marry it with their data on the back end. So that's where we're seeing a shift, not just on the traditional brands and agencies, but we're also seeing the digital agencies also being attracted to having access and a direct connect to that inventory through an API integration.
So one of the characteristics of digital, obviously, is we can be extremely precise in how we build our audience segments, and the measurability generally is there. Do you think that as we start to apply that same thinking to television, we run the risk of being too precise, or are we right on target by replicating some of the attributes of digital?
I think we have to be careful because the difference between digital and TV is you are dealing with a finite amount of inventory on the TV and an infinite amount of inventory on the digital. So I think that's where we have to be kind of careful on how we're looking at it from that standpoint. And I do think there's a way to manage those expectations. It's just something that we constantly have to be aware of, knowing that what works for digital might not necessarily be the same as how it is executed on the linear side.
And last question, I'm just curious, we've been throwing the word programmatic around in lots of different ways as an industry, and certainly today. What does programmatic television mean at WideOrbit?
So programmatic for us is basically an ease of execution, right? We're making it very easy and effective for brands, agencies to have access to that broadcast inventory. I think anyone who's bought broadcast in the past knows it's a cumbersome process, and what we're doing is alleviate some of those pain points so people can easily transact through our platform, get those reports next day and things of that nature to really make sure that they're managing their client expectations and getting results they need.